Welcome, friends, to the Healing Cancer Journey podcast, where we explore questions about the role of psychedelic medicines in our cancer journeys. I'm your host and fellow explorer, Dan Callahan. What if people living with cancer could access a medicine that reduces distress in 80% of people with a single dose? And what if those beneficial effects lasted out to 4 years? In today's podcast, we're speaking with Matt Zemon. Matt is the author of 3 best-selling books, Psychedelics for Everyone, Beyond the Trip, and The Veteran's Guide to Psychedelics. Matt holds a master's degree in psychology and neuroscience from King's College London. In this episode, Matt and I discuss how psilocybin helped him process grief and reconnect with loved ones, and why he believes that psychedelic medicines belong in a big tent that includes medical, spiritual, and community-based healing. As a cancer patient myself, I often frame my perspective on psychedelics through a medical lens, but Matt reminds us that these medicines have already been used by millions of people over many generations outside of traditional healthcare settings. Throughout this conversation, Matt emphasizes that psychedelic medicines are not cures, but rather they're catalysts, opening pathways for the cancer community to seek both healing and authentic human connection. Of course, this podcast is brought to you by Healing Cancer Journeys. We're a nonprofit organization providing education and community for people exploring psychedelic medicines and their cancer journeys. You can find us online at www.healingcancerjourneys.org or follow us on Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube, where our handle is Healing Cancer Journeys. As a reminder, today's podcast is for educational purposes only. It's not intended as medical or legal advice. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode with Matt Zemon. Matt Zemon, welcome.
Dan, it is good to be here. It's an exciting time for this organization and this podcast, getting this thing started.
Yeah, super excited to have you here. Thank you so much. And Matt, I want to start at the beginning. I want to start at the beginning of your book. Your book opens with a letter from your mom that was written at the beginning of your life. And tell us a little bit about why you started a book about psychedelics with a letter from your mom.
Starting with a good question. I went into my first psychedelic experience really not prepared. I had underestimated what I was doing. I had even gone into the experience kind of reluctantly. I'm like, I don't know if I want to do this. And in that first experience, I reconnected with my mom, who had died when I was 22 and she was 49. And I just couldn't believe that was happening, that I was able to reconnect with her, that I could feel the attachment from her to me, to my children. I was shocked.
Yeah.
And I was trying to figure out, how do I convey how important of a relationship that was to me to a neutral reader. And then I realized, well, wait a minute, I have this really beautiful letter that my mom wrote me when she was pregnant with me, and that would give an indication of how special I was to her.
Yeah.
And then then the rest kind of makes sense. And for me, that when she died, like, I lost all faith in everything.
Yeah.
And I went on, I did my things, and I was successful by all material counts, and I missed my mom. And in this one journey, I was able to realize that she wasn't gone, she was just somewhere else, and that I'm okay, and I've always been okay, and I'm loved, I've always been loved, and that I am a spiritual creature having a human experience.
Yeah.
And I just didn't know that before that first psychedelic experience.
Yeah. You are okay, and you are loved.
I appreciate that.
And you don't need validation from me. But, the sadness and the grief and the loss that you felt with your mom, that's certainly something that's very familiar to the cancer community. We've felt loss in losing people in the community to cancer. We've felt that loss in losing our former selves to cancer. In some ways, we have all died. There was a pre-cancer life and a post-cancer life, and there's a lot of mourning in that transition. And you talked about being able to reconnect with your mom during that psychedelic experience. Can you tell me a little bit about what that reconnection was like and how that experience in a psychedelic journey was unique, was something that you hadn't been able to experience in the past?
Yeah, and while it was unique for me, I have since learned that this is not unique for many, many people. It's not something that I would ever recommend people expect to happen in a psychedelic journey, and it is something that happens for many people. Um, in my experience, in this experience, it wasn't visual. It wasn't like I could see her. What I could do is feel her in a way that I knew she was present.
Mm-hmm.
And knew is really the key word there. It wasn't I thought she was present. It was that I knew she was present.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I have to believe that sounds, I don't know whether it sounds arrogant or I don't know how it sounds, but that's how it was. And once I knew she was present, for me, I then knew, okay, she's a spiritual creature. Oh, wait a minute, I'm a spiritual creature. And then once I knew that, I realized that the timeline on which I thought about my life, that I was going to be born and at some point I was going to die, and that was my life, that really wasn't the time horizon that I needed to play with. And that was a big shift for me. It's amazing. So the psychedelic that I used in that first experience was psilocybin mushrooms.
Mm-hmm.
And when we look at the studies at Johns Hopkins, at New York University, at University of California, San Francisco, many psychedelics can have really profound impacts on people with experiencing end-of-life distress, of the natural, of course, the feelings of depression or anxiety, the fear of transition, the shame, the blame, the regret, the guilt.
Mm-hmm.
Psilocybin is showing to consistently and quickly and sustainably reduce that those feelings on the people who have been given the terminal diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
Not as researched, but really interesting. There is some research on this, which I'll get to in a second. In the underground community, in the ceremonial community, it's pretty common not just to give a psychedelic, or an entheogen is what I would pretty much call it when it's used in a ceremonial setting, an
Mm-hmm.
entheogen, to not just the person with the terminal diagnosis, but to give it to their loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
And then everybody can have a different understanding of this process, or may have a different understanding. There is a clinical trial happening right now up in Maryland where they're going to give MDMA. They are, excuse me, it's current, giving it to cancer patients, and they get to pick one loved one that gets to experience it as well. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the first dyad clinical trial that's happening. But in the ceremonial world that I spent a decent amount of time in, that's been happening for a long time. And I guess I'll say one more thing. What I'm constantly surprised about with psilocybin specifically is when given to someone with a terminal diagnosis, they are often the first ones to emerge and say, I'm going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to be okay to their family members.
Mm-hmm.
And they take kind of a different type of lead in bringing the family together through the transition process, through the dying process.
Yeah.
And I think it's just so beautiful. It's so beautiful to be able to watch. It's so beautiful to be able to be a part of. And it's something that I truly hope that our government can find a way to allow this to happen easier. I mean, it just seems so, and I'll stop here in a second, Dan, but just it seems so crazy to me that we're using like antidepressants. So somebody gets a terminal diagnosis who's not on an antidepressant. Well, they typically give them an antidepressant, then it takes a few weeks or months to find out if it worked, and then if it doesn't, they've got to wean them off and start again.
Yeah.
Versus the research on psilocybin, a single dose can immediate change. So why aren't we starting with the single dose? Why aren't we starting with the medication that doesn't have addiction issues? Why aren't we starting or have the side effect profile or have it has? I just don't understand. And truly, I'm just hopeful that we're moving into more opportunities for people to experience psilocybin, again, both the person dying and their family, in the near future.
I hope so. And the comparison to SSRIs feels right. And I'd say from a cancer experience, the comparison to chemo is even more apt, where the side effects of chemo are horrible. Matt, I don't have a bit of hair on my head because chemo just took it all out. And if you just focus in on the risks of chemo, it's horrible, horrible stuff. But when you balance that with the benefits of chemo in terms of fighting cancer, the benefit is worth the risk. And I'd love for us to have that risk benefit lens on psilocybin, on other psychedelic medicines, so that we're not just looking at their risks. Are there risks? Absolutely. Do we also need to see the possible benefits? Absolutely. And weigh those in a rigorous scientific fashion. And you mentioned a couple of studies, which I want to come back to. I also want to go back to the word that you use, an entheogen. And that I think you're using that term deliberately. I've been using the term psychedelic or psychedelic medicine. Tell me a little bit about the word entheogen and why you're using that term, what it means.
Yeah, I'm going to do that, and then I do want to come back to chemo, but let's start with that. Um, a number of thinkers in this space wanted to come up with a way to distinguish the intention and use behind different medicines. Psychedelic carries with it a medical connotation. It can carry with it a recreational connotation. And there's, again, nothing wrong with that. But what these thought leaders, these religious scholars, as it turned out, and this was at I believe, a Harvard symposium, said, well, for at least 10,000 years, maybe 40,000 years, people have been using naturally growing plants to commune with spirit
Mm-hmm.
and to enter altered states. And that is a very different purpose than just purely medical or just recreational. And we need a word to talk about that. So they came up with entheogen. So that has been adopted over the last, 35, more than that, 45, 50 years, where we have entheogenic churches. So these are churches organized around psychedelics as sacraments. So entheogens as sacraments. And we have, I think, using that word when we're talking about the religious use of these medicines is the right choice. And hopefully the listeners, they can go, okay, I get that. Okay, when I'm talking about psychedelic, let's talk about psychedelic assisted therapy. The taking the psychedelics at the Grateful Dead or the Fish concert, great. And entheogens, oh, these are people who have a spiritual belief in this. And then I want to go back for a moment, and you talked about the risks with chemo, and that the risks outweigh the benefits. And what I think is important in the cancer world is that people, nobody has to take chemo. It's always whether the risks outweigh the benefits for them.
That's right.
And then they can sit down with their medical professional and say, look, these are the side effects, and this is what's going to do, and this is what's going to do to your body, and this is the long-term ramification. Should it even work? What do you want to do?
That's right.
And then each individual has a choice. The same thing is true for psilocybin. I've not heard anyone arguing that psilocybin should be mandated for people in end-of-life distress. And then it brings us full circle to, we talk about rigorous study. Well, there is study after study after study that shows, I'm trying to narrow in onto one psychedelic versus all the psychedelics, because then it gets complicated. But let's stay on psilocybin for a moment.
Yep.
Study after study after study has said psilocybin is non-toxic and non-addictive. As far as I am aware, there's only been 3 fatalities ever associated with psilocybin, and those were behavioral oriented from kind of the bad setting, as compared with the over-the-counter painkiller acetaminophen, which in America alone kills over 400 people every year. So there really isn't a scientific argument of why this is dangerous. Of course, there is danger that can happen. I'm not saying that it is safe, but I'm saying the relative risk and the ability to control that risk with psilocybin is settled science. So again, what's right for you or for any other adult? And when it comes to a natural growing fungi that grows in every continent except Antarctica, and we've been using it for tens of thousands of years, and cultures typically don't do things over and over that harm them. Typically, although we certainly are drinking a lot and smoking a lot in this country, but they don't do it. It just seems silly to me that this is not an option, particularly for those in the dying process. And those being, again, the person dying and their loved ones.
It feels silly to me too, and what you said about the decision between a patient and their doctor. I, as a patient, I get to choose whether I take chemo, whether I take radiation, whether I go into surgery. And it doesn't make sense to me why there should be any other entity, governmental or otherwise, that's making that decision for me. We do have laws, but there's also a moral law that I think transcends some of the legal considerations that we have to navigate as patients. And I believe I have a right to try, in the same way that I have a right to try experimental therapies for cancer. I should have a right to try, and I believe I do have a moral right to try psychedelic medicines like psilocybin. And let's stay with psilocybin for just a sec. Matt, to zoom out for the kind of novice folks, tell us a little bit about what psilocybin or magic mushrooms is. And as we're thinking about risks and benefits and effects, just give us a quick introduction to psilocybin, to magic mushrooms.
Yeah. So when I talk about psilocybin, I am talking about the natural ingredient that is found in a specific type of mushrooms that grow and that contain this chemical for easy understanding. In the medical world, they have found a way to synthesize psilocybin, and they do that so that they can be very consistent and pure with dose, and they know exactly what that this is equal to this is equal to that. In the wild, there are many different types of psilocybin mushrooms. There's strains, and one strain can be radically stronger than another strain. And even within the strains, there are the flushes, which means how the psilocybin, when it comes up out of that cycle. So a single growth cycle might have 3 or 4 flushes, and within the same flushes, within the same strains, there can be different potencies. So the requirements to use these medically are sometimes different than what is required to use them ceremonially. But so when I talk about ceremonial use, I'm almost always talking about naturally growing mushrooms. So when I'm talking about medical, it's almost always the synthetic capsules that are created from a scientific process. Like I said before, these are fungi that's grown for a long, long time. Humans have interacted with these for a long, long time. There's various theories of what might have happened because of human interaction with these fungus. And if anyone's listening to this and is kind of just kind of curious there's 2 easy starting points to look at. One is a beautiful movie called Fantastic Fungi. And it's slow art or slow speed filmography or filming, and it's Paul Stamets, who's been a mycologist for a long time, talking about kind of the power of mushrooms. And then an author named Michael Pollan, who wrote a book called How to Change Your Mind. Netflix did a 4-part series. Number 2 is on psilocybin. So those are kind of 2 easy ways to just kind of kick the tires and learn more about some of the power of this particular tool.
Good. And you talked about some of the research into psilocybin, talking about a single dose. So studies at NYU, studies recently published in the Journal of the American Cancer Society showing a reduction in depression or symptoms of distress up to 80%. And you talked about that effect being sustained out to, in some instances, 4 years.
4.5 years.
4.5 years. Tell us a little bit about what the research is telling us in some of those studies.
Yeah, I want to definitely slow you down on that because it's such important data. Again, people experiencing end of life distress given 1 dose of psilocybin in a clinical trial, and upwards of 80% of the people who went through the trial said they felt an immediate reduction, and a significant reduction in depression and anxiety feelings. For those who are still alive 4.5 years later, a follow-up study came back, and it was almost another 80% of those said, yeah, I can still feel this. So that's pretty incredible. When we take most medicines, it wears off sooner. And part of this, now this is where it gets, this is where this gets tricky. And this is where my Western mind had to wrap my head around this. I grew up in a culture that said, if I'm sick, if I'm broken, I need to take a pill that's given to me from a doctor, and that's going to fix me. The pill, the medicine, the doctor is going to fix me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the Western mentality. In the old days, and Alan Watts has a beautiful analogy about this, he said, look, there were just healers, and the healers were both medicine men and holy men. And when they thought about healing a person, they thought about kind of what needs to be done for the body or the brain, and what needs to be done for the spirit. And we, in our culture, we've separated those two things. And we've gotten into this this over-pilling of America, where we are now giving people pills for everything. We are numbing symptoms instead of getting to the root of the symptom, and we're using these pills instead of being episodic. Oh, I'm experiencing some depression because my loved one's dying. Okay, so for some period of time, maybe take this pill and then get off of it. But instead of people getting off, they're ending up staying on for years or decades, and it was never meant to be like that. And they're suffering tremendous side effects from weight gain, lethargy, sexual dysfunction, suicidal ideation. It's a pretty heavy price tag. But in our culture, our doctors are kind of our high priests. So if they say this is what we do, this is what we do. Okay, so now let's wrap our head around a different paradigm. The medicine doesn't cure anything when it comes to psychedelics. They're catalysts. What does that mean? Okay, well, I'm going to take this medicine, and it's going to help me remember that I didn't always think about the world the way I'm currently thinking about it. It's going to reduce my feelings of shame and blame and guilt. It's going to quiet down my inner narrator, and it's going to put me in a condition where then I can deeply explore myself, and I can see, wow, I've made up these stories about how life works. I've made up these stories about what's important. I've acted without this level of awareness at different points in my life, and I'm not bad for doing that, but I can see my role in that. And now that I remember who I am, and I remember where I came from, and I found that inner love and that inner worth, I can now go back into the non-medicine world, and I can carry that information with me. And when people talk about, like, there's this fancy word, integration, that's all we're talking about is how do we take the insights and the awakenings and the awarenesses that happen while on a psychedelic and move into everyday life, whether we're in the kitchen or the boardroom or hanging out with friends, with that awareness and that understanding. And when we forget, oh, I forgot, and now I remember again, and then I do it again. And that's the practice. So I say over and over, and people come to me and say, I'm thinking about psychedelics to fix me. You're not broken. You've never been broken. It's stories. And it's not going to fix you. It's going to hopefully put you into a state where you can find that truth inside of yourself. So I'm a big fan of not shaman, not gurus, not healers, co-creators of a space where you can feel free to do this work. And then when that experience does happen, you did it, not them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And not the medicine.
And that relates back to something that you said earlier about your mom and being able to experience and have that emotion, to have that feeling of being with your mom. I'll share, I've had a similar experience of having a conversation with cancer and during a psychedelic journey, and there is something about being able to feel and experience something that would otherwise be abstract, your mother or my cancer, that allows us to process some of that. And you've said that psychedelics are a catalyst and not a cure. And it's about creating that full environment in which that medicine can be a catalyst. And it's not just the pill, it's not just the medicine, it's the full environment, including, in some instances, therapy. And would love to hear a little bit about the combination of psilocybin and therapy to create that full catalyst.
I really appreciate that question. I want to go back for just a moment, and then we'll do that. When I know I spend so much time in my head, in my
Amen.
World.
Amen, brother. Amen.
Okay. In my previous world, it was all about kind of outthinking life.
Mm-hmm.
How do I plan for whatever it is I'm working on? How do I organize? How do I do? And when I hear you say I had a conversation with cancer, I know that is not using the language that we speak in everyday worlds. That's a somatic experience. And for me, who spends so much time in my head, when I use these entheogens, I get to practice. What is it like to live more in my body? What is it like to live more in my heart? And then, again, that's practice so that I can take that into everyday life. So I don't want to gloss over what you said. If I had a conversation with cancer, and how important that the ability to have that and to be able to say, okay, cancer, I feel you and I feel me and I feel kind of all of this. And wherever you want to go with that.
That's exactly right. That felt experience in the body, to get out of my head, because I feel you. I spend way too much time in my head. It's sometimes not a great place to be, but I completely agree.
Okay. So now you asked about therapy and psychedelics, and why is this important? Well, if we look at the latest studies with MDMA specifically, I'm just picking another medicine now. So MDMA is, for those who don't know, you might have heard it as ecstasy or Molly back in the day. It jumped into the recreational scene, the rave scene, the disco scene. It was a very popular drug because it makes people feel enormous amounts of love for themselves and for others. So it puts people into that type of condition where they can just radiate love. We're seeing a lot of that in the news these days, particularly with veterans and survivors of sexual trauma, because, again, this particular medicine has been very powerful for people who are have experienced those types of things and are trying to process that. So the shame, the blame, and the guilt, they need to move that away. They need to find that love for themselves, and then they can move whatever happened up close. They can examine it, and they can move through it. Beautiful, powerful. And companies sponsoring, the nonprofit sponsoring was originally called MAPS, and it's called Lycos, bundled the therapy with the medicine and said, look, the best efficacy, where we're seeing the best results is people who have 3 sessions of therapy in advance, then they have their MDMA, then they have 3 sessions afterwards, and they repeat that 3 cycles. That's where we see the best effects. Okay, great. So in that clinical trial, using that medicine, it was the combination of therapy with the psychedelic that made it powerful.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be cautious, though, in this, and I'm going to slow down again for a moment. I have a gentleman in my life who's a elder in this space who has given me this kind of perspective. He reminded me that, look, in 20 years of clinical trials, maybe 5,000 people have had a psychedelic experience around the world. In Oregon, where psychedelics are partially legalized, it's going to be about 3 years for 20,000 people to go through their system. When we talk about legalizing MDMA or psilocybin, it's going to be about 100,000, because of the bottlenecks and constraints and things, it'll be about 100,000 people a year who go through those systems for the first few years. And last year in America, 8 million people tried psilocybin and 2 million people tried LSD, according to the RAND report, a think tank. And if we take away those who had microdosing experiences, about 5 million Americans last year had a psychedelic. So I caution people, I get why we are all following the news stories, because the news stories are following the money in the research. And it's important to have that the medicalization, the scientific process is helpful for our culture to wrap our heads around, oh, maybe these do have a medical purpose because we've been in a prohibition for 50 years. Okay, so important. And 5 million people had a psychedelic experience in America.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how many of them had therapists or coaches. Now,
Yeah.
all that being said, for me, having a community to developing a relationship with the psychedelic. So not thinking of it in terms of a one and done, but I'm going to have a relationship. And sometimes I want to do larger doses, sometimes I'm going to do smaller doses. But as I commune with this medicine, as I use this sacrament to connect with spirit, to remember who I am, I'm also going to do that individual work in community as we have for thousands of years. And then depending on who the person is in community, sometimes those people need more support than just a community can offer, because we aren't an indigenous culture living in Brazil or Peru or Colombia. We are very individualistic in our society. So sometimes people need more support than what a community ceremony can provide. And for those people, having a therapist or having a coach or having a trusted friend that they can unpack, they can prepare in advance and then unpack what happened is super important. But I want to be careful of it's required or it's necessary. I don't know that. But I do think I've grown up so alone and so isolated. This is my house, this is my car, this is my job. I don't have time because I'm working. Okay, now I'm seeing the interconnectedness of all things. Well, being in community is something that's been very helpful for me through this process with psychedelics.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought us to community, because that's central to our mission at Healing Cancer Journeys, is to create community, to create a community of cancer patients, people living with cancer who are journeying together. And the benefit of that whole community is just so critical. I also appreciate the perspective, and as a cancer patient, I've been living with cancer for almost 20 years. I have been institutionalized. I have been medicalized, and that's a function of how we treat cancer. Is I've spent a lot of time in hospitals and with doctors, and so my natural lens on psychedelics is a function of my lens on cancer, which has been highly medicalized. And so for you to continue to remind us of, yes, is there room for psychedelic medicines in a medical context? Yes. And also there's room in a spiritual context and a communal context. And yes, there's probably also room in a context of going to a show and having a good time. And we call those contexts recreational, but we forget that the word recreation means to recreate. And I hope that there's space for medical usage and for spiritual usage and for recreational usage. And I think that's my question for you is there space? Are those three pillars mutually exclusive, or can they coexist in a big tent?
Well, they do coexist, and they've always coexisted. So the question is, will our government catch up to what's happening in reality? And whether we call them recreational or recreational, it's kind of irrelevant. Quick story on this. I had the opportunity to go to an all-night prayer circle, and this is with a wachuma, or San Pedro, or mescaline is the psychedelic that was used in this one. Peyote is another one that's often in these all-night prayer circles. And I'm down there, and you can imagine this was in Florida. Imagine, so there's a maloca, or a like a hut covering us, and we're all in a big circle, and then there's a fire, and there are the fire keepers, and there's the tobacco carriers, and there's the main minister, and then there's the assistant. It was so organized and so beautiful, and all night we took the medicine, we prayed, we were outside, we were down bowing before the fire, and then and as we were, two things happened that blew me away. As we were going, so the ceremony was starting, it was like 10 o'clock at night. There were kids in the group, not taking the medicine, but just around. And they kind of went behind their parents and went to their tents and went to sleep. And then in the morning, when we're praying to the rising sun, the kids started to wake up and made the noises that kids make. And it was beautiful. And that for me was an absolute realization of the medicine carriers using this for religious purposes have never stopped. They've just carried the medicine at great risk to themselves, to their families. They've just carried the medicine. They weren't looking for approval. They were just doing what they had been taught to do and what they felt called to do. And for me, it was such an awakening of, oh my God, if we don't create a religious freedom lane as we're coming up with whatever laws we come up with around this understanding of how powerful these tools are, we are once again stealing from this culture. And when I think about like colonization, or like the havoc that we did on our indigenous people in this country and in so many other countries, I think of that in terms of the past. Well, those are my great grandparents, or those are these other people. I don't think of like that's what I'm doing. So I call that out as a reminder that we need to have a swim lane for religious use, as different jurisdictions are thinking about this. And then you brought up then the recreational use. So we all know people who go to Grateful Dead concerts, you go to Fish concerts, you go to different things and use psychedelics and have beautiful experiences. And sometimes they have awful experiences because it depending on what the dose is, it may not be the ideal setting. Okay, but sometimes they have beautiful experiences. That 5 million people, I would imagine a good chunk of them had experiences like that. So it's happening, and the medical's happening, and the religious is happening. And now I would like our government to come up with laws that allow all three to happen, so that we don't have an underground, so that people aren't forced to buy product from people they don't know, people who might have a profit motive, people who may be adding things to that product to sell and to get, that might not be as healthy as we all want. When we have an underground economy, we can't talk freely. We can't give ratings. We can't have the level of scrutiny on things that I think is in the best interest of all of us. So my ask is, let's bring this above ground. Let's get back to collaboration between medical professionals and spiritual professionals. Let's have a better way to die in this country. Let's have a better way to explore feelings of depression and anxiety and OCD and eating disorders and substance use challenges and workaholism. Let's have a way to do that that's not just medical and that's not just spiritual. And we need to bring it above ground to have an honest and open and adult conversation about that.
Yeah. And it's a big tent approach. It's an all of the above approach. And I totally agree. My question, especially when I look at this through a cancer lens, is how we do all of that safely. I go to the cancer center and see my brothers and sisters and think about how much they could potentially benefit from a psilocybin or an MDMA. And also, I look at those brothers and sisters, and they're often brittle and frail and they're sick. And I want to have that big tent approach so that as many of those folks as possible can have access to psychedelic medicines, and also they can do that safely, and we can acknowledge that cancer patients aren't the healthiest in the world. And you've said something, and I want to quote you here. I don't believe that everyone should take psychedelics, but I do believe that psychedelics are for everyone. Mm-hmm. And I want to break apart those two pieces, starting with, I don't believe that everyone should take psychedelics. And I would love to hear, as someone with cancer, living with cancer, how do they self-select to know if they're someone that might consider taking psychedelics?
Love this. This is such an important question. And this actually ties back to even that word safe. There's no medicine that is safe. There are medicines that are risk reduced. There's the way we use the medicines that help us reduce our risk around them. But there are variables. There are some variables that we have a better idea of. So for example, a young person who has a family member that is schizophrenic may be genetically predestined for a schizophrenia experience. Taking a psychedelic may speed up that process. So probably not the right time to experiment if they have that condition. Now, a 60-year-old person who has a family member schizophrenic and they have never shown any signs probably isn't going to have a schizophrenic experience after having a psychedelic. There are people who are taking certain prescriptions that interact badly with certain psychedelics. So one example would be we've heard a lot in the news about ayahuasca. Okay, this is a beautiful brew that's done primarily in Central and South America. It's made in Hawaii as well. And it doesn't play well with SSRIs. It's deadly. So that would not be a good idea. MDMA that we were talking about doesn't play well with many SSRIs. Psilocybin has a little more room. You can be on an SSRI and take psilocybin. So what I tell people is this: look, if it was me, if you were my sister and I was talking to you, I would say start with a medical intake by someone who knows what they're talking about and isn't trying to sell you anything. So one research is Dr. Emily Culpa. Another one is Dr. Ben Malcolm, the Spirit Pharmacist, spiritpharmacist.com. All Ben does, he was a PharmD, so he's a pharmacologist who specializes in psychedelic pharmacology.
A doctor in pharmacology.
Yes, and all he does is medical intakes for people who are thinking about using psychedelics. And what he does in his consults is you send him your prescriptions and your family history, and he looks at them and he has a conversation with you and says, this is what we know from that little research that I talked about. This is kind of what we're seeing. And then because he only does medical intakes, he's like, and what I've seen kind of in the wild is this or that or the other thing. And like, oh, that fungal cream that you're using has a half-life of blank, and you need to stop using that for 4 days before your experience, or else it's going to dampen the effect. It's that level of precision that he can give people. Why do I like people, especially people who have unique medical situations, going to someone like a Ben first? If instead of going to a Ben, they go to a retreat center in pick your country, they're going to do a medical intake. Their doctors are going to look at the medical form and they're going to say, hey, thumbs up or thumbs down. They're probably not going to share with you how they evaluated the risks for you. So in my mind, going to a spiritpharmacist.com first is part of you taking back your power. I'm going to go and find out for myself what's the probable outcome if I use this psychedelic or this psychedelic or that psychedelic. And then with that information, I'm going to choose to participate in a clinical trial. I'm going to choose to grow psilocybin myself. I'm going to choose to go to an underground ceremony or therapist. I'm going to choose to go to a psychedelic church. I'm going to choose to go to a retreat center somewhere. But I will go knowing these are the risks for me and deciding as an adult I'm comfortable with these risks.
That's right.
So that would be my first advice for people who have these unique medical things. The other thing Ben does, and I'm sorry, and just because we've worked with a number of cancer patients through him, like he can help. Like, okay, you're doing this and you're taking chemo, so we want to really you want to time your psychedelic experience to be like the 8th day after this chemo treatment, so that you can have the maximum amount of time to process that experience before your next chemo treatment. He's got that level of detail that he can talk to you about. Yeah, it's people like him, like Emily. There's actually a psychedelic pharmacist association both in America and Canada. It's really, really beautiful that they're doing this kind of work and that they're providing this service for those who are trying to get good information. Because many times our doctors they're just not trained in this. They don't know. They're Googling the same thing we can do.
Yeah.
Ben knows, Emily knows, other people know.
And your point about taking power, empowering ourselves, that is absolutely right. Is cancer patients are wise. We've been through a lot of stuff, and we are empowered to make decisions and to get that information for ourselves. Let me ask you about the second part of that, which is that you do believe that psychedelics are for everyone. And does that include cancer patients? Do you believe that psychedelics are for cancer patients?
Yeah, I'm gonna tell a story without the who, but recently a group that I am very close with received a call, 58-year-old woman, stage 4 cancer, and she said, I need to organize a ceremony. Okay, what do you want to do? I want to have my husband, my 2 children, my 2 best friends in ceremony together, so that we can all feel together. And that's what happened. And it was beautiful. Fast forward, what was it, 4 or 5 months? She's still alive. And the experience was so meaningful to her that she asked, can I do another one? But this time I want to open to a little wider community. I don't want to actually take the medicine. I just want to cook for everyone and tell them I love them.
That's beautiful.
It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful.
It's a beautiful illustration of what you were saying earlier about the medicine being a catalyst and not a cure. That the cure was in the community. She didn't need to necessarily take the medicine to have the same experience. That it was the community. That's just a beautiful story.
And she knew she could see it. She knew she could look sideways at her partner. She could look not down, but across to her children. She could look at the community that was important to her and her 2 best friends that she had fostered for decades, and know that everyone was in love. So when I say that it's good for everyone. It is, what I mean by that is like, no, of course. Just people don't have to take this medicine to have this understanding. There are many ways to have mystical experiences. Some can get there through meditation, others through prayer, others through fasting, others through sleep deprivation, some through epilepsy, some music for some, art for others. There's lots of ways to feel completely connected and aligned with this universe.
Mm-hmm.
And for thousands of years, for our species, altered states through plants has been one of those ways. So I say to couples all the time, like I certainly meet a lot of couples where one is into entheogens and one isn't. And I say, you don't have to take the same medicine to be on the same path. It's beautiful. You've entered into a spiritual contract with each other for some reason, and this particular behavioral choice, this catalyst that one is using, doesn't mean that they're better than the other. It's just a tool for that person. But you're both teaching each other all the time. So that's what I mean by that. These tools, we've already as a species have decided that these tools are important. And we've said it again and again, even when governments have tried to suppress them, when people have been thrown through jail, when people have been persecuted, when witches were burned all over Europe for their uses of plant medicine. And yet the plant medicine continued because it's that important to us as a species. So both things can be true.
This is great information. And if there's a cancer patient listening, someone who was maybe recently diagnosed, or someone who received a terminal prognosis, or their loved one is living with cancer, and they're hearing about psychedelics or entheogenic substances, and they're just looking for a starting point, an entry into psychedelics, where do you recommend starting?
So there are people kind of like me who this giving information is what we want to do, what we do. So I am always available as a resource. So anyone listening to this and says, I want to just talk to this guy for 30 minutes. LinkedIn, Instagram, mattzemon.com, you can submit things and just schedule a call. No cost. That's not what I'm doing this. I'm doing this to help provide information, to answer questions directly, and to be really focused on the needs, the unique needs of the person I'm talking to. We can talk about Dr. Ben. We can talk about other practitioners. We can talk about things you've heard, whatever. How do I talk to my aging parents about this? How do I talk to my children about this? How do I talk to my grandchildren about this? Lots of things we can talk about. So I'm always available. The other place that a lot of people have success is finding their local psychedelic society and going to those meetings, and just seeing who do you connect with. So, okay, well, that person looks too woo-woo. That person looks too scientific. That person looks just right. Amazing. Go talk to that person. And then start asking questions. Well, how has your journey been? What have you experienced? What have you learned? What have you thought about? How's it felt? And then take all that with a grain of salt, because that's an N of one. But it is a one. And I know for me, I didn't do drugs. I just didn't. That wasn't my world before this. I wouldn't know how to find a mushroom or who to talk to about this. So I get it. I get when people say, I don't even know where to start. Well, for many people who live in kind of the bigger urban areas, those local psychedelic societies are good places to start. So again, talk to me, talk to Ben, talk to Emily, talk to your local psychedelic society, look up. Maybe there's a university resource near you, but those are kind of my initial starting points.
Yeah, and all of those starting points are community. It's getting in touch with other people, and whether it's a psychedelic society or whether it's other communities that you're connected with, it is all about community, and we want to continue to be intentional about building community and providing good information. So that's just great feedback.
Let me give one more thing, Dan, because I'm realizing that I'm leaving another avenue that might be important to some people out. There are certainly many, many, many people who don't want to go outside of the medical system. So for those people, what we have in America in all 50 states is legal ketamine. So if you want to stay in the medical system, and that your option is going to be ketamine, in all 50 states there are ketamine clinics. And you can go to any of them and talk to them. Now, with that being said, I want to put a flag out there for you to be just aware of. There are different philosophies on how to serve ketamine. There are physicians who are 100% legal who believe that ketamine is a biochemical reaction, that they can give you the medicine, you can have your experience, or you can have your whatever, the medicine's going to interact with your glutamate system, and off you go. And you're going to do that 6 times within 3 weeks, and it's going to, again, fix you. Totally legal. Those centers often look like dialysis centers. There's chairs, there's Netflix or some type of television programming. People are on their phones. You're going in and getting a ketamine infusion more often than not. often run by nurse anesthesiologists. Again, legal, philosophically different than other physicians and providers who believe it's a biochemical, psycho-social, spiritual process. In those clinics, they look more like living rooms, and you go in, you get a blanket and an eye mask and a soundtrack, and before having the ketamine, they're going to do like intention setting, and after the ketamine, there's some type of integration process where they help you unpack whatever it is that came up for you. That is also legal, and it's up to us as consumers. I'm not saying one is right and one is wrong, but to be aware that there are philosophical differences in how these medicines are served that are both legal, and it's an ideological difference. And it's up to us to find out what's right for us, and to maybe even supplement. Because a third option with ketamine is there are mail order ketamines. That means for a fraction of the cost, you can have pills or even shots sent to you, and in the privacy of your own home, have a ketamine experience. Okay, but then you have to provide your own sitter. You have to do your own work. Again, for people where economics are hugely important, that's a way to have access. So as long as you can supplement what is important to you to have, that is a very valid way to experience that medicine. Those same questions, though, of what is your philosophy? What are you going to do for me in advance? What are you going to do for me the day of? What are you going to do for me after? So that I can then make the decision of where do I want to put my money, are actually the same questions that you would ask an underground therapist using psilocybin, or a church using a psychedelic, or a retreat using a psychedelic. There is no right and wrong. There's just what's right and wrong for you. And you have to ask the questions.
That's right. And it's a great point that there are many, many entry points. And the question is, what is the right entry point? And the answer is whatever is the right entry point for you. And everyone is empowered to decide. Okay, Matt, last question. As we think about future guests on the Healing Cancer Journey podcast, what two guests would you like to see, and what are some of the big ideas that they'd be able to contribute to the community?
Yeah, I mean, I would love you to bring on someone from that Psychedelic Pharmacy Association. So Dr. Ben, he would be a great guest because you could get into some really specific questions that are unique to cancer that he would be able to answer, I think, more thoroughly than I could. And it would be, I think, interesting for your organization to gather those questions and say, okay, we spent some time talking to our community, and here's what we're curious about. Help us think through this, that, or the other thing. So I think someone like him would be interesting. I think having a ketamine provider on would be a good choice because it is legal in all 50 states that they can work with. It's just a completely above ground provider. Now, and again, quick, I didn't say it, but ketamine is technically a dissociative anesthetic. It's not really a psychedelic, but it has many of the properties. It's an option. And then I think I would love you to bring on someone from like the End of Life Psychedelic Care Association. So like Christine Caldwell's coming to mind, where that's all they do is help. They're kind of a subset of the death doula space, where they've added psychedelics into their bag of tricks. And how do they work with, again, the person dying and their loved ones, using this as a tool. And they have great thoughts around it. And because you're in North Carolina, I mean, we have this beautiful center up in Asheville on a really unique hospice model, heavily weighted on volunteers and no cost structure. And that would be another really interesting guest, more focused on mindfulness than on the plant medicine, but certainly sympathetic to this.
Okay. Well, Dr. Ben, Christine, consider this an personal invitation from Matt Zemon to join a future Healing Cancer Journeys podcast. Well, Matt, that's all the questions that I had for you. Just wanted to thank you again. Really enjoyed the conversation, and thank you for the work that you're doing in the community.
Thank you for organizing this beautiful community around this very challenging experience. That is the common denominator. You're doing beautiful work.
Thank you.